Hello, how are you today? Today we are going to be talking about, I believe this is lesson 7. So we are halfway out of 14 lessons. We are doing lesson 7 today. And so finally we are going to start talking about what really is Western civilization. Something that some historians mentioned, and I kind of like it, is when you describe Western civilization, what is it? What is Western civilization? Well, there are three components that form Western civilization. One of them is the Greco-Roman tradition, Greco-Roman culture. Another one is the Germanic tribes, and another one is Christianity. So the way I imagine it, you just put in the blender those three, turn it on, and the result is Western civilization. So we have talked about the Romans and the Greeks, the Greco-Roman tradition. We have talked about Christianity, the origin of Christianity, and now we are going to start talking about the Germanic tribes. Now historians of course wonder or argue which of the three components is really the most important one. And some people say, of course, the Greco-Roman tradition is more important. Some people say no, because the Germanic tribes are the ones who left the lifestyle and the legacy. And some other people say, no, it is Christianity. Well, regardless of what you think is the most important one, I would tell you that Christianity seems to be the most important one, because it is through Christianity that the Germanic tribes accepted the Greco-Roman culture. The Germanic tribes were not very happy with the lifestyle of the Romans, but it was through Christianity and through the Christian church that they assimilated part of the Greco-Roman culture. But anyway, this is just some argument that historians have. So we're going to start today talking about the Germanic tribes. And I'm just going to give you a few tips on how to study for this lesson. This lesson is very straightforward. We are talking about the Germanic people, their lifestyles, their ideas, but most importantly, we are talking about three people. Well, actually four. The one that you have on the screen now is Clovis, and he is very important. I'll tell you why in a second. Clovis is the king of the Franks, the first king of the Franks. In fact, he invaded the Roman Empire and took over. And so that's how the Franks began their expansion into the Roman Empire. But so why am I talking about Clovis and the Franks if we are supposed to talk about the Germanic tribes? Well, the Germanic tribes were hundreds of tribes, and out of all those hundreds of tribes, the one tribe that survived on the continent was the Franks. So the Franks, all the other groups were either conquered by the Franks, or they just died out, or they blended with the Franks. The Franks were conquering constantly. So between Clovis and Charlemagne, we could say that all of Western Europe became the kingdom of the Franks, with one exception: Spain. Because remember, Spain had been conquered by the Arabs, and Spain was Muslim land. And of course, the other group that also survived, but not in continental Europe, was in England, what we call England today. And that group was the group of the Anglo-Saxons. Originally there were three groups. They were the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. The Jutes were not many, so they blended in with the other two, and the other two mixed, and they became the Anglo-Saxons. So the Anglo-Saxons in what we call England today, and the Franks are the survivors, and they are the ones who became Western civilization. So, who are the four main characters that I'm going to ask you to pay attention to and to learn about? One is Clovis, the one that we are looking at on the screen, and the other two are the grandfather and father of Charlemagne, and the last one is Charlemagne. Those are the most important characters of this lesson. So let's start with Clovis. I'm going to ask you to look at the significance of Clovis. Now, why is it that Clovis is important? Well, the picture that you see is the key to understand it, because Clovis is the one who converted to Christianity, but not to Arian Christianity. Remember the Christianity of Arius? Remember Arius, the one who was considered a heretic because he denied the divinity of Jesus? Well, most of the other, I guess all the other Germanic tribes converted to the wrong Christianity, let's put it that way. And the only one who converted to the good Christianity, the true Christianity, was Clovis. So Clovis is the one that started a strong alliance with the church, with the Christian church, the one that survived. And because of that, the Franks had all the support of the church, and the church had all the support of the Franks. And that was a very convenient alliance for both of them. So read as much as you can about Clovis, about his wife, about how he converted, because that's another interesting story that shows the power of women at the time. And then we have two more very important historical figures. One of them, and I hope you remember, we talked about him when we talked about the Muslims, about Islam, because if you remember, we said that when the Muslims were advancing into Western Europe, they were stopped in the Battle of Tours by Charles Martel. So this is Charles Martel. And Charles Martel is very important because as the military leader of the Franks, he is the one who stopped the Muslim advance into Western Europe. So he, just because of that, he has a very important role in Western civilization. But he also was the grandfather of Charlemagne, and our key figure in this lesson is Charlemagne. So let's talk about Charles Martel a little bit more. What you see here is Charles Martel fighting the Muslims. This is the picture that you have here, and this is supposed to be a hammer because he was called the Hammer. So the term Martel means hammer, so it's Charles the Hammer. Then on this side, what you see is Charles Martel's son, Pepin. Because he had short legs, he's called Pepin the Short. And he's important because of what you are seeing here. What we see here is Pepin is being crowned king of the Franks by a person who is considered a saint. He is called Saint Boniface. You don't have to remember that, but he is the representative of the Pope. So you see the alliance between the Pope and the Franks. So, and this is interesting because it appears to be that the Pope has the power to crown king somebody, and so this is going to be significant with Charlemagne also. Now, Pepin then was not the king. Charles Martel was not the king either. They were what is called mayor of the palace, but because the Pope agreed that Pepin should be the king, Pepin became the first king of the new dynasty. And this new dynasty is called Carolingian dynasty after Charlemagne. So the word Charlemagne comes from the Latin Carolo, and Carolo is the basis for the term Carolingian. So Pepin is the first king of the Franks, of this new dynasty, the Carolingian dynasty. And then the rest of the lesson you are going to be dealing with Pepin's son, and Pepin's son is Charlemagne. So what was going on with the Germanic people? So before we talk about Charlemagne, I just want to remind you that it's important that we know who they were. So who is Charlemagne? Who is Charles Martel? Who is Pepin? Who are they? Who are the Franks? So before we talk about Charlemagne, I want to remind you that it's important for you to read in the book and to see all what you can see about the lifestyle of the Germanic people. We do not know that much about their lifestyle centuries before they got in touch with the Romans, because they were illiterate, so they didn't write. So the few documents that survive about the Germanic people were written by the Romans, and by that time the Germanic tribes had changed because of their contact with the Romans. But there is still a good deal of information about how they lived, and that gives us an idea of the difference between them and the Romans. So read all about them. Read about how their family worked, about their culture in general. Read about how they dealt with crimes or with disputes between people, which is really very interesting. Look at also the way they dealt with property, and also what kind of culture, intellectual culture they had. Of course, I would say to you that practically there was no culture. So they were not interested at all in culture. In fact, the Germanic people abandoned the Roman cities. They had no use for Roman cities. They had no use for literacy. They had no use for documents. If it had not been for the Christian church that continued with the Roman tradition of literature and literacy in general, and who preserved some, not all, but some of the Greek and Roman writings, we would not have any memory of the Greek and Roman tradition, because certainly the Germanic people were not interested at all. So, but you have to read in the book carefully all about their lifestyle. And also, when you read about it, read how was their lifestyle before Charlemagne and how it changed with Charlemagne. Because Charlemagne was so strongly religious, at least he felt he was so strongly religious, that he wanted to impose to his people and to all the people that he conquered the Christian values. So many of the traditions of the Germanic people were changed, at least the legislation changed with Charlemagne. It took much longer than Charlemagne for those values to change, but Charlemagne did make very important, crucial changes in the lifestyle of the Germanic people. Just to give you an idea, marriage was not, before Charlemagne, marriage was not considered a religious event. Marriage was totally a civil union, just the way it had been with the Romans or the Greeks, and it was Charlemagne, the one who began the concept of marriage as something that would have something to do with Christianity and with the church. And that's how the concept of marriage as something sacred, as something religious, as something that would be performed in a church by a priest started. And this is, remember, this is in the year 800 AD approximately. So we have several centuries before marriage was even considered something that had anything to do with religion. Okay, and so the last topic, and of course when you study this lesson you are going to spend a great deal of time talking and looking at discussing Charlemagne. Charlemagne is the most important of all the medieval monarchs. In many ways, Charlemagne changed the life in the Middle Ages. So again, when you start reading about Charlemagne or looking at all the different components in the lesson about Charlemagne, remember to look at his political achievements. Look at this. When the Franks were a tiny little group right here, and they, of course, every leader of the Franks had expanded a little bit, but eventually all this land that you see became the empire of Charlemagne. Charlemagne was crowned emperor by the Pope, so Charlemagne became, in a way, the new Roman emperor. So the Roman emperor that had resigned on the year 476 and the empire had was revived now with Charlemagne. And so look at this would be his political and military accomplishments. So look at all what he did, as I said before, trying to help Christianity and trying to have Christianity reorganized. Look at everything that he did, his great accomplishments. But the most important of all his accomplishments, and this is maybe, at least to me, that's what makes Charlemagne great. The word Charlemagne means, in French, Charles the Great. And Charlemagne is great mostly because of his intellectual accomplishments. Charlemagne was so interested in culture that he started what is commonly known by historians the Carolingian Renaissance. Here you have it, Carolingian Renaissance. So I'm going to ask you to look at specifically at the Carolingian Renaissance and look at how important it was, and also look at the features and the innovations of the Carolingian Renaissance. Now, I have to tell you that some historians say, oh, no, the Carolingian Renaissance was nothing. Charlemagne did not bring any innovation. There is no cultural advances during Charlemagne. And it may be true. It is true. There were no innovations, artistic or cultural or intellectual innovations during the time of Charlemagne. But just the fact that Charlemagne stopped the decay and decline of Western Europe, culturally speaking, just the fact that he stopped the cultural stagnation that had existed for centuries makes him a very important person. Because after Charlemagne, there were maybe 1 or 2 centuries that there were too many problems, too many invasions, and culture did not advance that much. But the Western Europeans were now ready to start developing a great and vibrant culture. And that was because Charlemagne had started that. And then the last thing that we are going to look at in this lesson is how this wonderful, powerful empire of Charlemagne, how it disappeared, how it collapsed. And this is one of the maps that you have in your book, and you'll see 3 groups: the Vikings, the Magyars, and the Muslims, and you see how all of them came at the same time invading the empire of Charlemagne. And of course, Charlemagne was great. He had power and he had charisma and he had the loyalty of his people. But after he died, his son could not hold the empire together. And then after his son died, then his grandsons divided his land into 3. This one, the west, then a middle one, and then the east. This was a very important treaty because they thought, well, if we divide the empire, we can maybe defend it better. Well, it did not work out that much at the time, but this treaty, the Treaty of Verdun, is important because eventually out of this treaty came 2 of the most important countries in Western Europe. This one, the Eastern Frankish Kingdom, became later on known as Germany, and the Western eventually became known as France. Now, at this time, when the central part and the eastern part united, the title of emperor that Charlemagne had passed on to the king of this Eastern Frankish kingdom. So this land became known as the Holy Roman Empire. And of course the ruler of this land was called the emperor. So the Western king, the king of the Western Frankish kingdom, was just a king, but the king of the Eastern Frankish kingdom was the emperor. And with this we complete the lesson, and so we are going to then continue with the following lessons. We are going to continue talking about what is called the Middle Ages, but it's going to be the Middle Ages after Charlemagne.